Hello everyone, Subbucky here and welcome back to another ASKA guide. Today I want to go over the 4 elemental runestones, what they are, what buffs they give and the best way to utilise them. So let's get started. There are currently 4 elemental runestones in the game: water, fire, air and earth. No heart runestone yet, but let's not give up hope, shall we? They are unlocked by fulfilling 2 criteria. The first is to just build a wooden altar, which is kind of easy and something you should be doing anyway to give your villagers a happiness boost in their downtime. The second criteria, and the one that is a little bit harder, is you have to have defeated one of the 4 mini bosses currently in the game. Be sure to check out my boss lore and strategy guide for a detailed rundown on how to defeat each of these bastards. Each runestone can only be built once and can only be worked by a single villager. On the one hand, I kinda hope this does get changed eventually to allow 2 workers per runestone, because as it currently stands, there's no easy way to get these buffs 24 hours a day. But on the other hand, maybe this is a good thing for game balance, I don't know. Let me know your thoughts on this. I am leaning towards preferring 2 workers, but as part of an upgraded version, perhaps. So when worked by a villager, runestones consume resin as a resource. This is something you will want to keep an eye on, because even with just the 1 worker, having all 4 runestones running at once will deplete your resin stock faster than you might think. And while being worked, the runestone can provide up to 3 buffs: an effect, ritual and power. The effect buff is simply a small happiness boost to anyone within range, so basically any villager sitting at the runestone will get a happiness buff. The ritual and power buffs are mostly the same, but just different enough that they actually do matter. They boost stats and proficiencies, which we'll get more into in a second, but the important thing to know about the ritual versus power buff right now is that the ritual buff is a global buff and gets applied to every villager on the map, even those assigned to live and work in faraway outposts. The buff stays active for as long as your runestone worker is working the runestone and will fall off shortly after their shift ends. The power version of the buff is a timed version and is granted to anyone sat at the runestone whenever the shaman sneezes these magic runes directly into your face. Thanks. This power version of the buff is incredibly useful because it stays with you even when your runestone worker clocks out for the rest of the day and the ritual version ends. Quick disclaimer on the differences between the ritual and the power buffs: sometimes the benefits stack, sometimes they don't. So for example, on the earth runestone buff you do not get the health bonus from the ritual version, despite the tooltip saying you should. I'll try to call them out as they pop up, but it does seem like a bug and something that will surely get fixed eventually. So whenever you plan to use these buffs for their benefits, just sit yourself down at the runestone and grab the power version. Another and slightly lesser known benefit of assigning villagers to a runestone is that they'll start leveling up their shamanism skill, which doesn't have a specific perk or proficiency trait attached to it, but it has a few handy hidden uses that you might not be aware of. Firstly, villagers with high shamanism skills make excellent healers over at the healing hut, and they can beat you back to health in a shorter amount of time than those with lower or no shamanism skill. Less thrashes, more healing, excellent. Another fun and often unknown fact about the shamanism skill is that you can also level it. Just light up the offering fire and interact with the runestone to start divvying out those buffs to your villagers. Increasing your shamanism skills does grant you the same healing through violence benefit that your villagers get for the healing hut. That's kind of useful if you play multiplayer, for example, and want to heal your friends. The more interesting benefit though is the higher your shamanism skill, the longer you can stay in raven form and presumably bear form once it's added. Devs, when do we get bear form, by the way? Raven form is achieved by crafting raven potions at the raven altar. They cost a Jotun blood each, but man, they are so fun for zipping quickly around or taking neat screenshots. Just make sure to keep a spare one on you and fly low before the timer expires. Lastly, each runestone gives a 25 housing point bonus, so build them near your residential districts to keep your villagers happy. Okay, that is it for the generic runestone buffs. That was a lot, to be honest, but wait, there's more. So now let's dive into each individual runestone, what they do, and how best to use them. Starting off with the Water Runestone, this is unlocked by defeating Helga, the Relentless, who is found at shipwrecks scattered across the coastline. Remember to loot the artifact from his body once defeated. Receiving the Water Runestone buff grants you and your villagers reduced thirst, and now I didn't really know how to test this without standing around for hours on end, which I'm definitely not going to do. So if you happen to know, let us all know, otherwise I'm pretty happy just taking the game's word on this one. The next benefit for the Water Runestone is an increase in dexterity. Now you can see on the left my baseline dexterity, and on the right with the Water Runestone power it's 21. This seems to be another one where the ritual buff isn't being taken into consideration, because if I have the ritual buff here, it's still on 6. I think that's just a bug. It'll probably get fixed at some point. So I'm just running a quick test here. On the left is my baseline, and on the right we have the Water Runestone power buff. I'm using a simple bow and bone arrows in both, and you can see there's about a 1 damage difference, which is nothing to write home about, obviously. But if I switch to a max level character, you can see that the damage difference is still nothing to write home about. Maybe this will get buffed at some point. It's more damage though. It is a slight damage increase, and if you're struggling with blood moons or an invasion, every little bit of damage is helpful. The best part about the Water Runestone buff, however, is the increased affinity for melee combat, which basically means you and your villagers get all 3-star melee proficiency as shown here in the proficiency tab. This is incredibly useful for power leveling your melee skills, so simply grab yourself the timed version of the buff in case the worker goes to bed, remember. Sleep at a cottage or a chieftain's hut for a stamina boost, then go absolutely ham smacking a training dummy. You can actually hit 100 melee in about a day using this method, though do keep in mind with the recent changes to barracks, a level 1 barracks will only train you up to a level 25, so build the tier 2 version to get up to skill 100. Next up, the Fire Runestone is unlocked by defeating Jarl Baneman over at the large Draugr Fields. Remember to harvest his body for the fire artifact. Once activated, the Fire Runestone buffs your strength, and what's really cool about this is that the ritual and the power versions stack. No idea if this is intended or a bug, but it's nice. So this is me without the buff hitting for about 15 to 17, and then with both the ritual and the power buffs on, that shoots up to 21 to 23. Bonus points if you take a nap at the chieftain's hut for a further strength and stamina boost. I'm now hitting for 25 to 27 with a wooden weapon at level 7. That is bonkers. In addition to the strength buff, you'll also gain 3-star proficiencies in blacksmithing, cooking, and firekeeping. For blacksmithing, you're going to want to head over to the bloomery and just start churning out iron bloom. This is a time lapse of me smelting and then hammering some iron. I started at 0 blacksmithing skill, and I used 4 iron, 16 coal, and look how much I leveled in 1 craft. On a side note, I would absolutely recommend that when you assign villagers to the bloomery, put somebody on the Fire Runestone for 24 hours a day. Yes, that shaman is going to be super pissed off, but the upside is your bloomery workers are going to get a lot of experience in that same 24 hours. To power level your cooking, just head on over to the cooking hut and whip up a whole bunch of soup. I was getting 2 levels per batch when I started out. You can further speed this up by keeping the cooking fire over 100% fuel so that it shows in the red like this. Then finally, for firekeeping, go ahead and prove to all of your Viking followers why you are the mostest, smartest Viking that ever was by going ahead and repeatedly turning off and on a flimsy torch. I'm sure they're not all talking about you behind your back. Moving on now to the Air Runestone. This is unlocked by defeating the Great Necromancer Skeletroll, still the best name ever. Make sure to harvest his body for the artifact once he's been defeated. The Air Runestone buffs dexterity, and like we've seen before, the ritual and power versions do stack, meaning you can double dip this buff. The actual damage increase though is still almost non-existent, so hopefully a balance comes to this by way of the eventual combat update. Proficiency wise, the Air Runestone buffs both gathering and ranged combat to 3 stars. Yes, the gathering one is a little less exciting at face value, but honestly, no matter what stage of the game you are on, you will be gathering something. Berries, flax, reeds. Gathering is something you never really stop doing. And the higher your gathering skill, the faster you pick stuff up. This isn't something I personally would go out of my way to power level because that sounds boring, but I may start grabbing the power version of this buff at least before my next flax or reeds run. If you want to power level this skill, then of course just grab the buff and pick everything up you see, but sticks would give the most bang for your buck, being as they can be interacted with twice. Finally, the real winner for the Air Runestone buff is, of course, the boost to ranged combat. Here's another time lapse of me shooting just 20 arrows at a target dummy, and you can see we are just back to back leveling up. It is insane. Just remember, once you hit level 25, you're gonna need to continue your training at the level 2 archery range. Just a second, it needs to catch up. And finally, the Earth Runestone is unlocked by defeating Fenrir over at the Wolf Dens. Remember to loot his body for the Earth artifact. Now real quick, Fenrir is, in my opinion, the hardest of the 4 mini-bosses to take on this early in the game, heck, even later in the game. So go ahead and watch my boss lore and guide video ahead of time, and also consider defeating Helga first for the Water Runestone and level your melee up to at least 25 before starting this guy. Anyway, let's carry on. The first benefit of the Earth Runestone buff is a very, very nice 100 health boost, taking you from a baseline 160 to 260. Now, as mentioned at the beginning of this video, this one is currently bugged where the ritual version does not give you the extra health. You will only get the extra health from the power version, which leads me to wonder if you'd end up getting 200 bonus health from having both the ritual and the power buff once this gets fixed. Something to keep an eye out for, and I'll update the description if and when that fix comes through. This health buff coupled with the Fire Runestone strength buff is going to be an absolute game changer on invasion days, because that is something you know when it's going to happen. It's a pre-planned event, you have a timer, so sitting down and getting these 2 buffs, or if you're going the archery route, getting the health buff and then the water and the air runestone buffs at the same time, absolute game changer for invasion days, and something I'm going to be doing forevermore. I can't believe I'd never done this before. Finally, the Earth Runestone buffs both your wood harvesting and stone harvesting proficiencies, and yes, that might sound underwhelming at first, but again, these are skills you're going to be using throughout your playthrough, whether you're in the early, mid, or late game, so skilling up faster and constantly skimming down on the time it takes to fell a tree or break a stone will be super helpful in the long term. Plus, if you're anything like me and you never clean up your Draugr corpses from blood moons or POIs, this buff does make those cleanup jobs less daunting because you will skill up faster while doing so, which will make future cleanup jobs take a little less time. Probably, I'm probably still not going to do it though. Devs, can we please have a corpse harvesting job already? And that's it in terms of the Runestone buffs, as well as my take on how best to use them. Be sure to check out my boss lore and strategy guide for a detailed rundown on how to defeat each of the mini bosses as early as possible, so that you can get these runestones up and running as soon as possible. And thank you so much for watching. If you found this guide helpful, then please consider grabbing a sub, dropping a like, or leaving a comment, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheerio.